All right, while I find my way, I am going to go over this. Now, what you should see on your screen right now, what you should see is a Word document, and I can send this out to you later today. I found this last night when I was looking through some junk online, and it's called the Fetch API. Now, hopefully you can see that on your screen right now, and if you cannot, you will let me know. All right. Much of what we do in this class has to do with APIs. I've already gone over what an API is with you. It's an application program interface. It's basically the equivalent of a software contract. So it's between you and the software. All right. And the software agrees to do X, Y, and Z for you. And you agree that you're going to, since it's doing X, Y, and Z for you, you will do it in a certain way. The reason I'm telling you that is as we start making our way into using APIs, you can, at least in a limited format, you can work with application program interfaces from the client side. That's what we're going to do today. All right. So very quickly to go over this document, and I'm not going to go over the examples that are in it. If you want to, feel free to. Okay, the whole thing, when you start to work with APIs in here, all right, it's all totally or at least partially an offshoot of using Ajax. Now, Ajax is actually a really bad name for this because it's asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The reason that Ajax is a bad name is that XML is used probably 10% of the time, when JSON is probably used 90% of the time, but they're not going to change the name. All right. What ended up happening with this, and I'm going to give you something, this is not in this handout or in this document here, but from what I read, there was some graduate student years ago that discovered that Microsoft had this XML HTTP request object, but it really wasn't being used for much of anything. And he figured out as part of his doctoral thesis, again, this is what I've read online, how to use it. And that's how the whole thing kind of came to mind. Now, in the olden days, like probably in the early 2000s to the 2015s or whatever, somewhere in there, people use the XML HTTP request a lot. It's not used as much anymore because in very many ways it's been replaced with fetch. All right. So we're going to look at both of them and we're going to write two applications at least today together from scratch as a class. All right. And the first one that we write is going to call one API, and we're going to actually set it up. We'll get it to run first using the XML HTTP request object. Then we'll take all of that JavaScript code and we will comment it out and we will rewrite it using fetch. Okay. Then when we get done with that, we will write another application that will go out to another API and it'll solely use fetch, but we're going to build it in stages. All right. So I want to quickly go over this document and I may jump back to it later. I don't know. But if you need more on Ajax, it's right here. And Ajax actually itself, the idea behind Ajax is you're able to get a partial page refresh. It used to mean back in the olden days, all right, so like really pretty much pre-2000, that if you had a web page and you just needed to make a very simple change in it, maybe a letter was wrong or whatever it was, the whole page had to be rewritten and it had to be reshown on screen. All right. Well, what Ajax did was it allowed you to do a partial page refresh. All right. And as it says on the bottom here and going on to the next page, it says with Ajax, web applications were able to send and retrieve data from a server asynchronously. In other words, in the background, without interfering with the display and the behavior of the existing page. All right, and again, it may not sound like a big thing, but it really and truly was, and it really and truly is. Now you can see this person is English or something else because some of their spelling words are going to be different than what we have in America. That's fine. So they do talk a little bit in here about XML HTTP request, and they give an example. Now, the way they do it, there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. Just so you know, there are a lot of different ways. But the big line in here, if you can see this, I'll blow it up a little bit, is if you look at line 13. All right. We have created in line 10 a new XML HTTP request that's going to be called XHR. All right. Then in line 13, we're actually going out to that API. So we're going out to GitHub users and that particular person. I don't know if that's the author of this article or not. I don't care. And we're doing it using a get. All right. When we do the fetch, it'll look very similar, right? Not identical, of course, but the idea is the way that fetch works internally, all right, it has been deemed to be better, faster, more reliable, more secure than using the XML HTTP request object, all right? Now, starting probably already next week or very soon, when we start to get into talking a little bit about Node and we go out to an API and we do it on the server side, you can still use fetch. But there is another way that you can do it that's deemed even better than fetch. And there's more than one, but the one that's used most often is something referred to as Axios, which you may or may not have heard of. And if you haven't, it's fine. And if you have, it's fine. All right. So they do talk about that. And like I said, right in here, then they get into talking about fetch right here. And as they say, it's a new native JavaScript API supported by most browsers. It allows you to make network requests that are similar, but actually a little bit easier to write, all right, than what working with the XML HTTP request object. The big thing about this is fetch uses promises. And again, you might say, well, is that a big deal? Kind of, yeah. All right. So when you make a request with fetch, it's going to end up looking like this. And again, let me blow that up just a little bit here. All right. So this is similar to the request we looked at just a couple minutes ago. However, since you work with promises, and you may or may not remember promises from the little bit we had on it last semester, but a promise basically is, for lack of better words, it's a request that you make, and it's going to be in one of three possible phases. All right. Either you make a promise and it's accepted. All right. So in other words, it was granted, whatever you want to say. You can make a promise and have it not work, where it's rejected. And you can have a promise that's out there, but it hasn't been acted upon yet, and it's pending. The key thing, though, is when you work with promises like this, you do a lot of work with this .then that you see right here. All right. And you can chain. We talked a little bit about chaining yesterday. You can have a .then, and then after this, there could be another .then, and after that, there could be another .then, etc. So you can have as many things as you want in here, and you can actually have more than one .catch in here if there's different kind of errors that you want to catch. And if you say, sounds a lot like a try catch, yeah, it is. And it's pretty much done the same kind of way. So like I said, you're going to see this as we start to go through it. I will send you this article. Feel free to look at it. If you don't care less, then fine. All right. But like I said, I think at least it's a good start. And there's some links in here for the Fetch API, using Fetch, and working with the Fetch API. All right, and that's from the Mozilla. So is that, and this is from Google. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. Now, I want to do one thing. I got to get up for just a second and walk over to the other side of my room because the fan that I have in here just went off, and it's about 85 degrees in this room. So give me just a second here. All right, hopefully that won't be too loud for anybody, okay? But what I want to do is I want us to build right now the first of these requests that we're going to do. And for the first one that we're going to do, we're going to go out here. And I don't know if you can see that, so let me quickly make sure. So I'm going to stop my share and start my share again. I think that you still can, but I want to be sure. So we're going to go out to this numbers API. And there's different ways that you can use this. We're going to use the simple one, which is putting a number in here. So we're going to go out to numbers API.com and we're going to give it a number. For example, we'll give it 5. And we're going to get a message. 5 is the most common number of gears for automobiles with manual transmission. All right. So there's different ways that you can do this. You can give it just a simple number. You can, well, like I said, it's this one. You can give it, you can work in here with dates. You can even do some random stuff. Why am I spending some time talking to you about it? Because every time you go out to a site and you're looking at that site's API, they're always going to be a little bit different. Typically, if you peruse your way through here, there'll be some kind of a reference. This site, I think, only has one page on it. It's very simplistic, but many sites have a lot of pages on there. And I literally mean they have a lot of pages on them. All right. So why am I even telling you that? Because sometimes it's really easy to go through and start to work your way through a site and figure out what's what. And sometimes it's not. All right. So again, what we're going to do right now is we're going to build a simple app. All right. So in order to do this, I'm going to have to change and reset my share with you a couple times. All right. So let me start and do it first. And the first thing that I'm going to do is, let's see, I'm going to come over here. You can't see this, but I'm going to my desktop. All right. So I'm going to change my share. And I'm going to change it to my desktop as soon as I can find it in my mess. There it is. Okay, so you should be able to see my desktop. I've already built this, but when we get done, in fact, I think what I'll do for just a second here is I'm going to show you both of the applications that we're going to build today. All right, so the first one is going to look like this. Not really grand, glorious, or anything else, but it says fun facts from numbersapi.com. So we come in here and we put in a number, 23. And notice 23 is the number of crosses on Calvary in the Monty Python film Life of Brian. If I hit the backspace key once, it changes it from 23 to 2. If I hit it again, now there's nothing in there. All right, and I really should have had that clear out, but I guess I didn't. I thought I did, but it's no biggie. The point is, we're going out to that site that I just showed you on numbersapi.com to get this information. All right. Now, is that big a thing? No. All right. The other one that we're going to do, and I'm not even sure if you can see everything that I'm doing in here or not. I'm telling you that one thing I just cannot stand about Teams is it's very hard to sit there and do shares and have it when you stop sharing and you have to keep stopping and starting again. And I don't like doing that. The other one we're going to do is a Chuck Norris joke generator. So if we come in here, Bill Gates thinks he's Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris actually laughed once. So we can do that. And if we don't want to keep it as Chuck Norris, we can put in our own name. Jeff Scott can hit you so hard, that he can actually alter your DNA, etc. Right. So we're going to set up both of these, and we're going to set them both up from scratch. All right. So changing my screen share with you again. You won't have to turn this in. I just wanted to give you some practice, so to speak, with this stuff. So what I'd like you to do is on your desktop or wherever you create stuff for this class, go in there and create a new folder. All right. You can call it whatever you'd like. I'm just going to call it numbers. Numbers. Okay. And I don't like creating folder structures and the like. I personally do not like doing that inside of code. It's too easy to screw up, in my opinion. So I just open up my numbers folder. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create two other folders. I'm going to create a CSS folder and I'm going to create a JS folder. All right. And I'm also going to come in here and I'm going to create a brand new file. And you probably have already guessed, but it'll be my index.html file. All right. And in this new folder, I should have called it JS. All right. So I now in my numbers folder, I've got an index.html, which is empty. I mean, there's nothing in that file. I've got a CSS folder, which is empty, and I've got a JS folder, which is empty. I'm going to open the CSS folder. I don't even remember if I put any styling in this or not, but just in case, I'm going to put in styles. I'm sorry, not a folder. I want to come in here and create a file, and I want that file to be called styles.css. In much the same way, in my JS folder, I want to come in there and create a file. And again, it doesn't matter what you call it, but I'm just going to call mine scripts.js. All right. So I have come in here and I have created a new folder. That new folder is called numbers. Inside of that numbers folder, I created right underneath it an index.html file. I also created two other folders. One folder is called JS, and it contains a file called scripts.js. And the other one is CSS, and it contains a file called styles.css. Hopefully that was easy enough that everybody understood it. All right. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to change one more time. And hopefully this will be the last time for a bit. Okay. I'm going to come in here and I am again going to reset my share. And I want to reset my window in here. And I want all of you to please open up Visual Studio Code. All right. So I want you to open up Visual Studio Code. I'm going to close all this stuff. All right. So inside of Visual Studio Code, I'm going to do a file and I'm going to do an open folder. And from my desktop, I'm going to find the numbers that I just created. And I'm going to open that up. So one last time in here, I currently have an index.html, which is empty. I've got a JS folder with a scripts.js in it that's empty. And I've also got a CSS folder with a styles.css, which is empty. I'm just going to keep plugging along. And I figure that if any of you have a question, a comment, or something goes wrong, or whatever, that you're going to say something. All right. I'm just going to make that assumption. All right. So I'm going to start by going into my index.html file. And you probably have done this already, where we put in the exclamation point, Emmet kicks in, you hit tab, and we get built for us a template file. All right. So I've just created that template file, and here it is. I'm not going to spend a second going over it. You already know what's in here. There's nothing new in here. I am going to come in and change my title. I just don't like documents, so I'm going to say numbers, API, example. All right. This right now, we've got 12 lines written. This is not going to be a very large index.html file. We'll probably put about 15 or 20 lines into it, something along those lines. All right. So the first thing that I want to do, and again, I'm sorry I got to keep doing it like this, but I'm going to go back out here, and for a second, I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to restart my share because I want to go out to the internet. All right. So I'm going to go out to the internet here, and I'm going to go out to Bootstrap. So go out to bootstrap.com. I did most of my styling, if not all of it, not bootstrap.com, I'm sorry, getbootstrap.com. So go out to getbootstrap.com. All right. Nothing new here. You've all seen this before. All right. Like I said, not really anything new here, but go over to examples. And under examples, I think it was examples, maybe it's the other one. Let's see, is it docs? Yep, go to docs. So under getbootstrap.com, click docs, and you get this get started with Bootstrap. No, I'm not going to grab this. I'm not going to grab any of that. All right. In fact, the only line that I really want is the line that's going to have in here, and I don't remember where it is, but there is Bootstrap CSS in there, right here. Okay, everybody can see this line, hopefully, under CDN links. So I'm going to highlight that line right there, so I'm able to put the Bootstrap CSS stuff and use it on my page. All right, again, I'm in getbootstrap.com. I went to docs, and under docs, I went down maybe halfway on the page or so. And under CDN links, I don't need the JavaScript one, not with what we're doing in here. I just need the CSS one. So I highlighted it. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. All right. Now I have to change my share again. And I'm going to go back into VS Code. All right. So in VS Code, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in the word link. And then I'm going to hit tab. All right. And that filled all that stuff in for me, but I still have to do my href that's right here. So I'm going to paste that in. Okay. So I just pasted in the Bootstrap CSS stuff that I grabbed from the CDN. With what we're talking about in here right now, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. All right. But there shouldn't be anything that we've done so far that's a surprise to anybody. There shouldn't be anything that we've done in here so far that you don't understand. All right, like I said, I could be mistaken, and if I am, if you have questions on anything, please let me know. All right, so right now there's nothing in the body section, so I'm not going to, but if we were to bring this up in live server, not going to show us anything. So let's start filling in the body section. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is in the body itself, you've got your choice. Again, this is up to you. I can come in here and say class equals BG. And if I put in dark here, all right, and do nothing else, so body class equal BG dark, and I bring this up in live server, you can see the background. It's a dark background. Some people like that. I'd rather work with a light background, which gives us a light background. All right. And I realize when I probably go in here and probably am doing my open live server, you may or may not be able to see it on screen. All right. It's no biggie one way or the other. but just follow along with the code in here if you would, please. All right. So you know as well as I do that when you're working in Bootstrap, virtually everything you end up doing goes into a container. Now, don't type this. I can come in here and type in div. Oops. So I can type in div class equal container. Again, don't do this. And boom, it'll give me that. And that's totally fine. And if I didn't show you these shortcuts, then shame on me. I can come in here and I should be able to say dot container and hit tab. And you'll notice it does the same thing. And that is a Visual Studio Code Emmet shortcut. Now, did that buy me a lot? No, and it probably took more time to explain it than if I just put it in there, typed it in there literally. But I want you to see that there are shortcuts in here for setting stuff up. All right. So inside of this container, we're going to start doing some formatting. So I'm going to put in a row. Okay. Now we're already 20 lines in, and believe it or not, we're about halfway done already with the CSS in here. Okay. So class equal row. The next thing I want to do is basically, I'm going to want what we're about to do. I'm going to want it to be centered on the screen and take up about half the screen. Okay, so I'm going to put another class in here. So I'm going to say dot call -md -6 and mx -auto. All right, and of course it didn't work when I did that, so screw that. Let's just put in the MD6. Dot call MD6 and hit tab. There we go. All right. So I want a div in here with a class that equals call MD6, but I also want to add to that MX auto. And what is that? That says I want it the margin all the way around, all right, to basically be centered for me. So far I've come in here, I've set mine to light, yours might be dark, and I've got a container that has a row in it, and I'm starting to format what's going to go into that row. All right. We want to put in one more div in here, and that div is going to have a class of basically card, and it'll have a couple of other things too. Okay. And then we'll actually start putting our code in. So in here, the class will be card, BG, and you can give it whatever color you want. I made it primary because it's got a kind of that bluish tint to it then. I wanted the text in there to be white, and I wanted a top margin in there, and I wanted some padding all around. Okay, so we've got that. And I'm going to save what I have. And if I go and look at it, it doesn't look like much. If you've looked at yours, it just looks kind of like a blue thing that's in the middle. All right, you may or may not be able to see it on my screen. It's no biggie, one way or the other. All right, so we've got what? A div within a div within a div within a div within our body. All right, so that's where we are right now. All right, so the first thing that we're going to put in there is going to be an H1. And again, you can put what you want, but I put in here fun facts from numbersapi.com. All right, that's what I put in there. And underneath that, I put in a paragraph. And in that paragraph, I said, enter a number and get a random fact about that number. Again, if you don't like my verbiage, just use your own. As I've said before, you will not be turning this in. All right. So if I go back and look at mine, again, you probably can't. But right now, well, it didn't like my text because it didn't make it white. So I'll have to check on that. All right. but it's got fun facts from numbersapi.com and it's got the paragraph in there. Let's see why it didn't like that. So let's see. Oh, right there. That shouldn't have said text width. That should have said text white. Okay. Go back and look again and see now if it looks the way I want it to look. Yes, it does. All right. Now I can go in if I want to. I could go in and with CSS, I could make it look probably nicer than it does. It looks okay the way it is. All right. So we've got that paragraph in there. Underneath that paragraph, we're not going to actually build a form, but we're going to put a couple things in there that, for lack of better words, will kind of look like a form. All right. So I'm going to put in here an input. And I'm going to say type equals number. And I'm going to give it a class. Whenever you do this, basically it is a form control. So I'm going to give it the form control class, which will do some of the editing for me. All right. And I want this to be form control large. Right? In fact, let's see, class equals. There we go. Like that. All right. And not that what I'll have to put in this is an ID. So my ID will be equal to, we can call it anything we want, but we're about to input a number. So I called it number input. All right. But the key thing in here is the type is number. All right. So ID equals number input, and we'll give it a placeholder. And whoops, enter a number. Something like that. All right. So we're not done, but that almost is all of our HTML right there. We got about 3 or 4 more lines to add. So save that. And I'm going to go back and take a look and admire the handiwork here. And well, something looks wrong. So somehow I've got something screwed up. I'll fix it. I'm not worried about it. All right. So let's see, what did I screw up? With me, it could be anything. So input type equal number, class equal form, control large, ID equals number, placeholder. Let me look at because luckily I've got my cheat sheet here.
It looks like you're missing an R in control large.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's see if that fixed it. No. Yep, it did. Thank you. All right. So I now have this, and again, you may not see that on my screen, but hopefully you see it on yours. You've got either a dark background or a light background. You've got a card on there that's got an H1 heading that says fun facts from numbers.com. And underneath it is a little paragraph that says enter a number and get a random fact about that number. And then you've got a text box with a placeholder in it that says enter a number. All right, we're almost done with our HTML. So jumping back into here then. All right. I am going to put in one more div. I think there's 4 more lines, and then we are done literally with the HTML. All right. So one more div here. So I'm going to put in a div with an ID. So I'll put in a pound sign, and you can call this whatever you want. I just called mine fact. All right. So I want a div with an ID of fact. And it also will have a class that is going to be equal to card body. All right. And inside of here, I'm going to have 2 things. I'm going to have an H4 tag that's going to have a class that's equal to card title. And it'll say whatever you want. I just said number fact. And I'm going to have a paragraph in here. With an ID, and I gave that ID, it's going to have the text about the fact. So here's surprise. I called it fact text. And I gave it a class that's equal to card dash text. Now, this stuff that you see in here in card dash body, card dash text, etc., that's all stuff that's available to you under Bootstrap. So if you go over to Bootstrap and you go over to components and you find card, you can see all this stuff. All right. I'm going to do a file save. And if I look at it again up on my screen, the only thing that's in here that I don't want is where it says number fact. And you should see yours too under that. I don't want that to show until I put in a number. Now, what I just said should make sense to each and every one of you. All right. I don't want this H4 tag that says number fact. I don't want it to show until up above I actually put a number into that input box. Then I want it to show number fact. Then I want it to show the paragraph that's got the information about that number. All right. So what does that mean? That means that higher up, and there's different ways of doing this, but what it means is if I go back up here, before I go in and add that link, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to do some styling, just a line or two. So I'm going to say for that thing that's called fact, I want to put in there display none. And if I did that correctly, and I go back and look at this again, that thing that says number fact, it's now gone. All right. That is my entire HTML that's in there. Okay. All right. And I'm looking at this, I'm looking at my notes, and I actually don't think, I could be wrong here, but I don't think that I added any CSS. I was going to do that later and then just didn't. No excuse, I just didn't. All right, so going back into my Visual Studio Code, I'm going to do a file save. And for now at least, I should be able to close this file. All right. And what I want to open is my scripts.js file. Okay. And really what I did was I put two different scripts in here. One that we're going to write right now, and the one that we write right now is going to handle, all right, it's going to handle doing this fetch with XHR. So with that XML request object. All right. Then we're going to write right underneath it. After we get that to work, I'm going to comment almost all of that stuff out. And we're going to rewrite it using the fetch API. All right. The whole thing combined is about 40 lines. So even though I could have broken it up and I could have actually had two different files, one called like xhr.js and the other one called fetch.js, and that might have been a cleaner way to do it, I put everything into one file. The reason I'm bringing this up to you is these are the kind of things, again, that you have to start thinking about as a developer. All right. Now, with those of you who are in this class who are going to graduate in December, you should have gotten an email from me this week. And if any of the rest of you are interested, I'll be more than happy to forward it to you. But it was from the Rankin Connection, and they actually had a job in there for a full stack developer. All right. Now, you may not feel, well, geez, I've had 2 days in this class, I'm not ready to apply for that. But what I'm telling you is there's a lot of jobs out there. So they will be looking at the way you code. All right. So with all that said, let's come through here. Now, the first thing I did in here was I came in here and set up a few variables. All right. So I did a let fact equals, now, whoops, try that again. Let fact equal. And when I do this, you should all know this already. I could do either document dot get element by ID, or I can do document dot query selector. Okay, both of them will grab the instance of something. By using the ID, it's assuming there's only one of them, but when you use query selector, there's also a query selector all. Query selector will grab the first one that it finds. Query selector all will grab all of them and basically hold them in the equivalent of an array. All right, so I'm just going to use query selector in here. And I said pound fact. All right, so what is that? It's looking for something with an ID of fact, and I guess I should have kept this open. But if you look in here, there's fact. So that's the div we're talking about right now. That div, the one that's going to hold all the information in there. All right. In just a second, we're going to make another variable that's going to be called fact text, and that's going to be referencing this. Again, there shouldn't be any surprises here as we're looking at this stuff. All right. So I've got the first one, and then I said let fact text equals document dot query selector again. And it was fact text. All right. And again, we could have done these with get document dot get element by ID or with query selector. All right. I typically do mine with get element document dot get element by ID, but a lot of the stuff, oh, and that should have a pound sign on there. I'm sorry. All right. But a lot of the stuff that I see, people aren't doing that. All right. They're using query selector more. So I'm trying to use both, in other words. All right, finally, what did we call that? I think I called it number input. That's this. I want to be able to work with that. That's going to be the number that I'm going to input. All right, so let number input equal, same kind of thing, document dot query selector. And this was pound number input. All right. So far we haven't done a whole boatload of stuff in here. We've declared 3 variables that we're going to use. And basically we've done nothing else. All right. Okay. What I want to do is basically with that number input. All right. Remember that number input is right here. Okay. So that number input, if you go back, I'm not going to run it, but if you go back and look at it, that's what's in the white box, in other words. All right. Whoops. I want to now come in and set up an event listener. So if I do want comments in here, declare variables. And then in here, I will set up my event listener. And by now, hopefully at least, you've got a comfort level. All right, with event listeners. Most of the work we've done in the past with event listeners, we would be putting in there something like the name of a button dot add event listener, and then we'd be checking for the click on the button. Well, that's not the way this is set up here. What we want is this number input that's right here. So we want to say number input, dot number input dot add event listener. All right, on our input. And then, input. Why it's doing that, I don't know. Okay. Then we want the name of the routine that we're going to call. Now, I do want you to see something here. I'm going to call the first one get fact 8. Well, we can call it anything we want. We'll call it get fact XHR. All right. And I'm just going to stop for a second. I'm going to stop right there. All right. And then I'm going to type in this, and this is going to be commented out in just a second. All right. Again, I'm going to comment this out. You already heard this shtick from me. I have written both of these routines, the XHR and the fetch routine, in this file. So what I'm saying is when we first run this, we are going to be calling getFactXHR. After we get that to work, then all of the code that's in the function called getFactXHR, we're going to comment out every bit of it. Then we're going to comment out this line and uncomment this line because we'll do it with fetch. All right. Not that this is a big thing, but and you're all smart people, but I just want you to realize that we've got two different event listeners in here. They're both doing the same thing, but they're calling different functions. All right. So we will end up having two functions in here. We will have one function that's going to be called getFact XHR. Okay. And we're going to have another one in here that's going to be called getFactFetch. All right. And what we will do is right now I'm looking at the time and it's 12:55. So I'm going to give you a break right now until 1:05. All right. And at 1:05, we're going to finish writing this. And I just want you to, then I can start talking about the similarities and differences between them. All right. In fact, let's make it 1:06. All right. So we'll pick it up again at 1:06. I got to leave for just a minute and get myself, I didn't bring any water in here. So I'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, I'm back. I hope you are back as well. I do want to mention before we write these two functions, notice there are no parens there. We don't want to call that function. What we're telling it with the add event listener is every time an input event happens, call that function. But you do not, when you are setting up an event listener, you do not come in and put in parens. Now, if you do, you typically won't get any error message. It just won't work the way that you want it to work. All right. Okay. And one more time, just because we got part way into this, and then we took our break. So we've got fact, text, and number input. Fact, text, and number input. So in other words, the number input, that's what we called that text box where we're putting our value. The fact itself is the div that's going to hold the answer, so to speak. And the actual answer for when we put in a number is going to go into fact text. Okay, so let's write that right now. So the first one is function get fact XHR. All right. So we're first going to say let number equal number input dot value. Oops, I don't know what happened there. Dot. Why is it doing that? Number input dot value. Huh. That's what it's supposed to say. Let number equal number input dot value. We've already put number input up there. So we did define it. I don't know what happened, but that's what we want. We're not done, but so number is going to hold that value. One thing we don't want to have happen is we don't want it to go out and attempt to call the API if we have not put a number in to the text box. So if that text box is empty, we don't want to do anything. Well, number is going to hold the value that was in that text box. So if number does not equal the empty string, right? And again, I just have to assume here, I don't see your faces, so I can't ask you to shake your heads or do whatever. I'm just assuming that that makes sense to everybody. All right. Now we've only got about 7 or 8 more lines to write in this function. So if this is the case, number was not empty. So a number was input into there. So we let XHR equal a new XML HTTP request. All right. So we're telling it we're going to use this variable to basically make the request to the API. We do that next. XHR.open. It's going to be a get request. We're not providing any information. We're getting information from where? HTTP / I don't know why it does that. Numbers API.com. Now, if we do that, we aren't including the number. So we want to append onto there the number. So for instance, if I end up putting in the number 12, it's going to call numbersapi.com with a /12 on the end. All right. Now, the way that this XML HTTP request object works is there's a few things that we have to do. For instance, one of the things that we will have to do when we get all done, all right, when we're done with this if right here, is we'll have to say xhr.send. We're still not finished. There's still some stuff that's going to go in the middle here. but we're opening it here, and at the end, we want to send it. All right? Okay, so the next thing we put in here is xhr.onload. So when it is loaded, we want to set it equal to a function. All right, and then that function, this is when we make the request, if the request worked. So if we make a request to numbersapi.com with the number we've appended, and if that works, we should get a response back of 200. All right, that should be the response that we get back. Remember, like 404 means that the file wasn't found. 300 something means it's an error on your end. 3 to 4, really 400s. 500 means it's an error on the server side, etc. So we want to come in here and say, if this dot status equal 200, then we know everything worked. All right, so we've got it. We went out, we made a call to the API, and it worked. Okay, well, that's good, but we have to now display that information. So we can now come in and say fact.style.display, because, oh my goodness, why is it doing that? It's got to be something that, oh, that's fine. Dot display equals block. We had originally back in here, we had told it that we didn't want that fact to show. It was invisible. But now that we've got something to put in there, we want to make it visible. So we're setting its style equal to block. All right. And we're going to say the text, so fact text dot inner text equals this dot response dot text. Oops, it's one word, response text. In English, fact text dot. All right. In English, what this means is this is what gets returned. This is the response text. So that's the number information that we get back from Numbers API. All right. And we want to put it inside of that paragraph. Now, notice I'm saying inner text here. We're not having any HTML returned. In other words, none of it's bolded or underlined or anything like that. If it was, then rather than inner text, we could put inner HTML, but there is no HTML in there. So I'm just saying inner text. So as we look at the whole thing from the beginning then, all right, I want to run through everything from the start. We came up here and we said fact was equal, all right, that fact, that was that div that's going to hold our number information, okay? Fact text was the paragraph that basically actually holds that information. So this is the div that holds this, and number input is just that. That's the number that we are inputting. So what we're saying is, because this is the first one that we're doing right here, all right, that every time we change what's in that box, call getFactXHR. We could have called this anything. This and this could have been called anything. But since this time we're using an XML request that we're calling XHR, that's why I called it that. In just a minute, we'll do the other one that uses fetch. All right, so then in the routine itself, we are grabbing, this is the value that we put into that text box. We are putting that into a local variable called number. So we don't have to constantly in here and any place else have to be typing in number input dot value. All right. Here we are telling it only to run this text if something was indeed put into, that text box, meaning it's not empty. So if that's the case, there's a number in there. All right. So we make a new XML HTTP request and we call it XHR. And then when we do this, we first tell it to open. We tell it it's a get. There are other things that can be entered in there, but since we are not providing any information, it's a get. We are retrieving information. I told you yesterday that in many ways, the use of get in there is similar, although not identical. It is similar to a select, all right, that we did with databases. Okay, so we're telling it to do a get from where? From here. We're telling it to go out to this API, which is at http://numbersapi.com, but we're telling it we want it what based on this, it'll put in here. So if we typed in 67, all right, into that box, then 67 is what's in number. So there'll be a 67 appended on here, for instance. So we open it. And then the next stage in here is the load. All right. So again, when we load it, we're attempting to take that information, all right, and actually bring that information in to where we want it displayed. All right. If it returns 200, it worked. We're not doing anything if it doesn't work. All right. Not only that, maybe you've already run this. I don't know. But what'll happen is if you start putting in really big numbers, like if I put in a gazillion, it'll say gazillion is an uninteresting number. It doesn't have a fact in there for all infinite numbers that we have in the universe. All right. So if it returned 200, then we want to tell it to display that div, which we had earlier made invisible. So we're setting its display from block, whereas earlier its display was set to none, meaning again, it was invisible. Then we are saying whatever response text was that was returned from the API, we want to put it inside of our paragraph. Then we tell it to send. All right. And that's it. Now, just so you know, a couple things. First thing, this in here, this, all right, that is really known as a callback type of function, all right? And we're going to get into what callbacks and stuff are later. You don't have to worry about it, but this could, I believe, there's no reason we couldn't have rewritten that using the arrow syntax. I didn't do that, maybe I should have. That should work as well. Why am I telling you that? Because once we get into where we're working with Node, I won't be using this syntax probably ever. I'm always going to be using that syntax, which is called the arrow syntax. All right, so just get used to it is about all I can tell you, because that's the way most code today is written. So I'm going to do a file save. All right, I'm going to come back into here where I've got, hopefully mine is showing someplace in there. There it is. And I'm going to try to put in a number, 11. And of course, nothing happens because that's always my luck. So let's debug this and see if we can figure out why. All right, I'm going to go over to console and see if it gives me anything. It didn't. So let me check through my code and see if I forgot to put something in here. All right, I would never do this on purpose. I screw up enough. You all know this. I screw up enough as it is anyway. All right, so let me go back and take a quick look in here. All right. It doesn't matter, but I really should have probably put semicolons in there, but that shouldn't matter. And here, none of those should matter. It looks like I left them off all over the place. But that shouldn't have any difference at all in running this and making it work or not work. All right, so let's see. The only thing I can see is I did this originally, but it should work fine with that. So let's see. Our new XML HTTP request. I can go back and make that a function, but that shouldn't matter either. If I do that, I've got to get rid of the arrow syntax. And when I did this, I also made that just 2 equals, but that, again, that really shouldn't matter. In fact, that's block. That looks totally correct to me. Let me double check the XML, or the HTML, I should say. I wonder, I didn't end my paragraph here. Don't know if that would have done anything or not. Oops. No, I didn't end my paragraph there. That may be what the problem was. That line in your HTML, if you typed in what I typed in, that's what that line should look like. So let me save this. Go back to here, here, here. Close. Well, I'll leave it open. And of course, it's still not showing a darn thing. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the working one because for some reason I made a mistake. I want to bring up the working one because I want you to be able to see it and I want you to be able to compare your code with that one because I want you to, have a working copy. So let me do this. Okay. All right, so just to show you that it does work. So if this is the same one, but this is the working copy. So if I put in 12, there it is. 12 is the number of pence in a shilling in the former British currency system. If I remove that, 1 is the number of dimensions in a line. If I remove it, again, that should have gone away, but it didn't. 2 is the first magic number in physics. If I add a 3 to it, you can see, hopefully at least, that it's still going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the working copy that I have, and I'm going to bring that up in VS Code so you can see it. So if you've got any desire to make sure yours works, unless yours already does work. All right, so let me close this. All right. And actually, I'm running the other one right now. I'm running the fetch. So let me comment this out. Let me make sure that the one I put in there does work. The one with fetch, we're going to write in just a minute. It's right there. So save that and bring this up. Bring up the HTML file in live server. Make sure that that works. Yeah, it does. So I don't know what the heck my problem is. So let me show you. This is the HTML. Again, this is all boilerplate stuff. All right. That, to my knowledge, is everything I showed you before. I grabbed it from a little different site before, so it had that integrity and the cross origin. Yours might not have that, but it should be the exact same thing other than that. That should not be enough to change anything. There was the style, the fact with a display none, the title. Oh, wait a minute. No. Hold on. Let me, you know what?
I think it might have been that you forgot your script tag at the
That
bottom.
is exactly what I just thought of. Yes. Yeah. So, thank you, but you're right. So let me do a file and let me close that folder. Let me bring up the one that we have been working with. But you are right, Mr. McLean. Yes. So I want numbers. All right. You're right. What he said, and he is correct, is what I had to do in here is at the bottom of my head section, put in a script tag. So script, defer, all right, source equals js/scripts.js, like that. Okay, I was never calling the darn file. So let's save that and try running it one last time. Correctly, hopefully now. So opening it with live server, again, you may or may not be able to see that. Well, yeah, that was it. Yeah. Now, there's a couple things in here that are sloppy. What do I mean? Well, right now, I should have cleaned it out so that when there's nothing in there and you remove everything, I should have had that all disappear. And I didn't. This was one of those projects where I you know, like with the CSS, I was going to go back at a later time and do it, and I didn't. So please make sure that on yours, you add that line. You have your choice. We've talked about this before. It used to be the old school way of doing this was to take that script tag and put it in your body section at the very bottom, right before your ending body tag. All right. And it has to do with the way that things are loaded into memory. I don't remember the order. All right. But it is possible if you put it in like I've got it right here and you don't use the word defer, that the system may try to use some things that are JavaScript-ish before all of the JavaScript has been loaded. So by putting that defer attribute into your script tag, you're saying, hey, defer or wait all right, before loading this until everything else has been loaded. All right. Hopefully what I just said made at least a little bit of sense, and hopefully after putting that line in, you got yours to work. If for some reason you like, I think I put in everything you had and it didn't work, feel free to zip what you got and send it to me, and I'll be happy to take a look at it. This is the beginning of the semester. Weird stuff happens. All right. In my morning class yesterday, I lectured literally for 3 hours. At an hour and 47 minutes, the video just stopped, and I was never alerted to that. It just stopped. There was no more recording. Because one of the guys emailed me today and said, "Hey, I thought this was supposed to be a longer video. You said it was like 3 hours and 30 minutes. It's only an hour and 47. So tonight, after I get back from my guitar lesson, I get to go back and basically redo that. All right. So let's go back into our scripts. And now that that works, I'm going to take everything that's in here, this whole function, and I'm going to comment it out. I'm commenting out the entire function. Why?
Mr. Scott, you're not showing your code.
Okay, thank you. But thank you for letting me know. All right. So hopefully you see it now. And I have commented out the entire get fact XHR. It's all commented out. Why? Because I'm also going to comment out the line that called it, okay, right here. And I'm going to uncomment the other one. So now we're going to run the get fact fetch function. All right. So what has changed on here is we're telling it now that every time we put in a number, that rather than calling this code, we want it to call this code. And we're going to put that code in there right now. It's about the same size as the last one. All right. So let's put that in right now. So we can steal some of the code from before. In other words, we can steal this number thing and that test. So I'm going to start by stealing that. Okay, since we put in the beginning curly brace, we need an ending curly brace. We still want to let number equal to whatever we put in there. That's totally fine. But now what we want to do is the magic will happen in here. We are telling it to fetch, and we are telling it again to go out to http://numberapi.com. And we are again telling it that when it gets done with that, with the slash there, we want to append onto that number, just like we did before. So fetch has got in there the same parameters that we had for the XHR, except we don't need to tell it to get. All right, that's inferred from what we're doing. All right, so we've done that first, and we don't want a semicolon there. But now we're going to start chaining. We're going to say dot, then. Response. And I'm going to go over all this after I put it in. There's only 4 or 5 more lines to type in. And that's everything. So I will give you a chance to key that in. But first, let me do a file save. And let me go back to here and run it and see if it still works. Especially with the luck I've been having here. So that's working. No, it's not. It says here function text native code. Well, that ain't good. So let me double check my code. Fetch. Oh, that's it. Should be parens in there because that's a call to a routine. All right, let me save it and try it again. There you go. It works. All right, so that said, I'll give you a second to key this in. It is 1:39. I'll give you till about 1:42 to key that in if you have an interest. And then I'm going to go over it line by line and also talk about the differences between this and between the earlier one. All right, perhaps the easiest way to explain the difference between these two is let me grab this and copy every bit of it, not move it, but I'm going to copy it all to the clipboard. And then I'm going to put it underneath the other one. All right, I got to remember to remove it later, but the point is this. When you looked at the first one, there's the if statement. And when you look at the second one, there's the if statement. So let's look at some of the differences. First of all, we don't have to check the status. But in both cases, after we go through and do this, well, first we do the open. And as I mentioned before, you had to tell it the type of request because it's an HTTP request. It can be GET, it can be PUT, it can be patch, which you use for updates, it can be delete, etc. So there's a lot different things that you can choose in there. All right. We don't have that with the fetch. It's just fetch. Hey, go out to this API and grab this. All right. With both cases, though, we give it the URL and we append onto the end of the URL the number that we've just entered. All right. Then in here, we've got to go and there's a whole big thing we got to run through, check the status, etc. Here, we're doing kind of the same thing. But what we're saying here is try doing this. If it works, try doing this. And if this doesn't work, grab the error. And if this doesn't work, grab the error. All right. So we're doing a very similar type of operation. Again, the big difference is All right, the way we're doing it in the other case is we're using fetch as opposed to using an XML request object. All right, the other thing to notice on here is everything that was done in here was done with arrow functions. All right, so as an example, just so you see this, where you've got this right here, this could have been rewritten as function and then remove this. That would have worked also. All right, so where we've got this arrow, we could have done the same thing here. We could have typed in function and gotten rid of the arrow. Finally, oh, so what am I missing here? I'm not sure right there, but I don't want to screw this up too badly. All right, and we could have redone this one. What you typically see when you start working with server-side code is you almost never see it done like this. It's become the standard to do it like that. That's just the way that people do it. It's less typing. It's considered cleaner looking. All right. But the key takeaway here is when you are working with fetch, fetch returns a promise. All right. And a promise will either be rejected or it'll be accepted. If it does all this stuff, the promise was accepted. If anything goes wrong that we try to do in here, it's going to be rejected. All right. And if you can wrap your head around that, so to speak, you're going to start to understand this stuff. All right. Now, I don't know if I made, if that was a good case for this or a bad case for this. And I'm sorry that I forgot to include my script file. All right. But I did. So let's do one more thing before we take our next break. All right. So I'm going to save this. And I am going to close this folder. Okay. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to create a new folder. So if you would please, we'll do everything from inside of code except this. So I go to your desktop or wherever you're doing this, create a new folder and just call it Chuck. The word Chuck, C-H-U-C-K, nothing else. So create a new folder on your desktop or wherever you're working from that's called Chuck. And then from in here, I'm going to do a file and I'm going to tell it to open that folder. So open folder, Chuck. All right, so it's now open. There's absolutely nothing in here. All right, I'm going to start. And this time I am going to come in with a folder. That folder will be CSS because I'm going to add some. Okay. I'm going to add, I'm going to add another folder that's going to be called images. Okay. And I'm going to add one more folder that's going to hold my JavaScript. So I've added 3 folders in here. All right. One that's called CSS, one that's called images, one that's called JS. In addition, in here, I want to put in my index.html file. All right. So that is my setup in here. In a little bit, we will add our styles.css file. But the first thing I would like you to do, if you would please, and to do it, I will change my share so you can see what I'm doing. All right. And that is, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to go out to images.google.com. All right. And I'm going to search for an image of Chuck Norris. And I'm in Chuck Norris cartoon. You can put anything you want in there. There's a lot of them. the one I picked was this one right here. You don't have to use that one, but it's the one I'm going to use. All right. So I'm going to do a file and I'm going to do a save image as. I'm going to go back to my desktop and under Chuck and under images, I'm going to put it in there and just call it chuck.jpg. All right, I realize you probably couldn't have seen everything I did. It'll be fine. You'll have to take my word for it. It'll be fine. All right. So when I go back then into, and let me go back and change my share again. Into Visual Studio Code, under images now, I've got chuck.jpg. All right. Again, you can choose any one you want. If you choose one that is humongous, you're going to have to use CSS to resize it. I chose one I knew I wouldn't have to play with and do much resizing on. All right. Now, our HTML file in here is quite short. So I'm going to, again, invoke Emmet with the exclamation point and hit tab. I'm going to change my title in here. And I'm just going to call it Chuck Norris Joke API. You can call it again, whoops. You can call it again, whatever you want to call it. It really and truly isn't going to matter. All right. But before I finish doing this, I want you, and you can all do the same thing if you want to, and that is I'd like you to all go out and in your browser window, all right, in your browser window, let's see. I'd like you to please go out to icndb.com. icndb.com. That's Internet Chuck Norris Database.com. All right. This is a much more expansive and extensive API than the first one we looked at. Okay. This is much bigger. So there's a little bit of stuff in here, but when you go in the jokes, all right, they're not all listed in there. They're actually what this is more than, yeah, I think they are in here. So most of them are in here. All right. There's the API. This is what's important, where it says API, because what we will want to do is we will want to be able to invoke this and not even have to put in a number like we did last time. We'll just want to click a button. And when we click the button, we'll want this to go out and find a random joke for us. So if I keep going down, notice fetching a random joke. And I'm highlighting http://api.icndb.com/jokes/random. So if I do that and I paste that up into my address bar and hit enter, now I've gotten JSON back. So you can see, what is it? Type success, meaning that my request worked. And what comes back in here is a joke ID number, the joke itself, and the category of the joke. So if I come back up here and I hit enter again, you'll notice I get a different thing. Okay. Now, it's not in any category, but you notice there's an ID and you notice that there's the joke. All right. All I'm trying to tell you is basically what we are going to want to do is we are going to want to click a button and have it run that particular thing for us. Okay. We don't have to worry about supplying a number because in this API, they've got a random one in there because this is a more, again, extensive API than the one that we looked at previously. All right. So that said, let me change my share again. We'll go back and let's build the HTML and then we'll take another break. All right. My whole thing is about 25 lines long, so it's about half built already. Okay, we are going to have in here, we are going to have our own CSS file. So I'm going to type in link here and hit tab, and it will be under CSS, and I always call mine styles.css. That hasn't been written yet. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. All right. And again, yes, Mr. McLean, this time I will say script. All right. Defer. Source equal. Under JS, I just call this one jokes.js. All right. That, to my knowledge, is everything in my head section. I'm not going to run it now. There's no body. Nothing is going to happen. All right. I could, but there's really no reason to do that right now. All right. So coming into the body, into here. All right. Again, probably about 10 or 12 lines, something like that. All right. Again, I'm going to use a div that's going to be of class container. So dot container, hit tab. So there's my div with a class of container. And again, I will put an H1 in here. I'm going to give it an ID of title. You can give it any ID you want, but I'm going to say Chuck Norris joke generator. Okay. All right. Then I'm going to add my image. So image source equals images / chuck.jpg. If you called it the same thing, I did. All right. I'm going to give it an alt tag. So alt equal, and I put picture of Chuck. And I gave it an ID, and I'm just going to call it ID equal, and I called mine CN for Chuck Norris, CN image. Now, it's kind of hard to read, so let me move this over. There you go. And let me end my image tag. All right. Now, if you take what we have so far and I do my file save and I open this up in live server, doesn't look very good. It's not at all terrible, but it's pushed way over, etc. And there are ways that this could be improved. So let's do a couple of them right now. What do I mean? Well, what I'm saying is let's go back and let's go into our CSS folder and let's create our styles file. So styles.css. All right. And first, for the body, you can pick any font you want, of course, but I just said font family, and I chose the one that starts with Arial. Okay, again, you don't have to do that, but that's the one I chose. All right. So first thing, then do a little bit of work on the container. That was a class. And the first thing I did was a display flex. And I said flex direction column. And I spelled flex wrong. Still spelled it wrong. There we go. All right, so flex direction column. And I said, let's see, align item center. Put a little bit of padding in there. Made the max width on there, I set it to just kind of random to 800 pixels. And I did set margin, but I don't know if I have to do that or not. Let me look. So let me go back here and open it with live server. Okay. So, and the last thing I did in there then, I guess I do need it is margin 0 auto. Okay. So I'm taking for granted you've all typed that in if you're following along and want to type. And now I'm going to come down here and do my image. And that is the It's got an ID of CN image. And all I did was I gave it some margin bottom of 1 rem. Okay. So if I go back and take a look in here, mine is now centered on the screen. Okay, it looks decent. Again, if you want to play with this, you're not turning it in anyway, feel free to. Who cares? All right. It is just about 2 o'clock, so I'm going to give you another break, and we're going to come back at 2:10, and we're going to finish writing the HTML. There's about 5 or 6 lines, and then we're going to go in and write the JavaScript, which is more extensive and expansive. All right. So let's come back, please, at 2:10. All right, it's 2:10, so I'm going to continue. After this image here, I'm going to add a form, and it's got, a half dozen lines or so in it. We're just about done with the HTML then. So form, and I'm going to give it an ID. I don't want it to go anywhere. So I'm just going to call it CN joke form. Could have called it anything, but that's what I'm calling it. So, and it will have two labels, two input boxes, and a button. So label for equal first name, input type equal text. Somebody else start doing that right. ID equal first name. And placeholder, you'll see why that's important later, equals Chuck. All right. Let me move this over. And I'm going to copy this because I want another one for the last name. I'm just going to make some superficial changes in there. So this will become last name, of course. So will this. So will this. And we'll put Norris in there for the placeholder. All right. Just one more line. And that is, we're going to have, we could make this a div or whatever. I just made it a paragraph. All right. And I put a paragraph in here, and it's got an ID in there that's equal to joke text. That's where the actual text for the joke is going to go. All right. So I just came in, and since we've come back from the break, I added everything that you see in blue. So I'll give you a minute or two to go in and add that. And if I come in here and save and go and run that under live server, it looks not that great, not that terrible. All right. I noticed that one thing I did forget in here is I need a button basically. So after I put in the information, so let me add that. So after this, I'm going to add a button. The ID is going to be CNBTN, Chuck Norris button. Oops. And the type is submit. And then finally, the text in there will be get joke. Okay, hopefully I didn't make this too wide. I can always widen it out if I need to. So let me look. There's my button. So it's not a flashy interface at all, but it's, again, highly functional. So we've added this since we went on the break. Give you a minute to put that in if you want to. All right, then I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go over to my CSS, and I didn't put a lot more in here, just a few lines. So I said for the joke text, I just wanted to make sure that it showed okay. So I set the font size to 1.5 rem, the font weight to bold, and the text align to center. Again, that's the stuff that's where the joke about Chuck is going to appear, right there. And for the form itself, that was called CN joke form. Whether it's a label or an input where the type is equal to text. So for both of those, I set the font size here to 1 rem. And I again set the font weight to bold. Okay. So again, since the break, I have added this into the CSS. All right, I'll leave that there, but before I do, I just want to run it myself and go back and look at it on here. Okay, and what you're going to find is now the stuff that you put in there is now all going to be bolded, and the text is a little bit bigger than it was. Okay, all right, so all that is left then, is to write the associated JavaScript, and that's what we're going to do next. So I'm going to take for granted that everybody's had time to key in all that everybody has the HTML in and the CSS in. So I'm going to go over, because I didn't make this, I don't think. Nope, I don't have anything in there. And I call this, I don't remember if it was joke or jokes. We called it jokes.js. So I'm going to come into my JS folder right here. I'm going to add a file. The file I'll add will be jokes.js. Okay. This is not particularly long. It's probably about 25 to 30 lines. All right. Then when we get done with that, I want to talk to you about what I'd like you to do for tomorrow and what I'd like to do tomorrow and Friday, and we'll probably be done again around 3 o'clock. All right. It's not normally that we're going to always be done early like that. I guess just for this first week, it's for whatever reason, it's worked out like that. All right. So the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to do a bunch of get element by IDs here. Okay. So I've got my const cn, move this over, cn joke form. And just to show that you could do it, all right, this time I did use document.get element by ID. Again, it doesn't matter which way you do it. So cn joke form. I think I call that joke text. Yep, there it is. So again, the first one, the joke form is here. Here's the joke text. So that's the actual joke that's going to come in there. And equals joke text. Now, normally, don't type this in, but I do this. I'd say first name equals document.get element by ID, first name. All right, and then I do the same thing with last name, but I'm not going to do it like that. You'll see why in just a couple minutes. So I called it the first name, and I set that equal to document.get element by ID of first name, and the last name, and again to last name. You're going to see why I did it like that, hopefully at least, in just a minute or two. So I came in here first and created these 4 or 5 variables. I guess it's 4. So I'm going to declare and initialize variables. Okay. So that's the first thing I did was to set all those up. All righty. Then I want to come in and I want to set an event listener. All right. But that event listener is going to end up being when I submit the form. All right. And when I submit the form, that's basically when I click that submit button. Okay. Now I wrote this and then rewrote it and then rewrote it again. So I'm going to put some stuff in there that you may or may not have seen before. We will go over every bit of it. So if what we're doing does not make sense, then just please hold on for a couple minutes because we're going to go over all of it in just a bit. All right. Let me see if it works. No, I put my own name in there. All right, that's everything. So let's give you that. So I'm going to leave all of this up here through about right here. I'm going to leave that up for about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to pull down so you can see the rest of it. All right, some people like it in blue, some don't, so I'm going to remove that. And we will go over every line that's in here before we finish today. All right, I'm going to take for granted that everybody understands what each one of these things in here are. So the first variable is the form itself. The second variable is where we want the joke to appear. The third variable will be the first name. The last variable will be the last name. Now, you might say, why wouldn't you have just put in here first name? Don't change yours, but I'm going to show you what we could have done. I could have said first name just like that. I could have done that. And I could have said last name just like that. But then instead of writing what we have here, and I'm going to just comment this out. In fact, let's copy it and then we'll comment it out. I would have had to have written something more along the lines of this. I would have said first name equal first name dot value. If it's equal to nothing, then set it equal to Chuck. All right. So if it's equal to nothing, question mark, Chuck, colon, first name dot value. And then I would have had to have done the same thing with the last name. So this would have been last name dot value, again, would have been equal to Norris. And again, it would have been, oh, I'm sorry, if it would be equal to nothing again, be question mark Norris. And, whoops, colon, last name dot value. All right, we don't need the semicolons in here. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with writing it this way. When I look at this and I look at this, there's really not, to me, this is much easier to read. So what I'm doing is I'm saying create a new variable, and I wouldn't have to use const here because the variable's already been created. All right. But this is saying, okay, grab whatever is in that first name, grab its value. So whatever we put into that text box, if it's equal to nothing, that means we didn't enter anything at all. So we're going to put a default in there of Chuck. If there was anything in there, use its value. And then do the same thing for the last name. If it is empty, we'll use Norris for the last name. So these are our defaults here in here. If we put in a first name but no last name, so if I put in Jeff with no last name, it'll be Jeff Norris. If I put in a last name with no first name, so if I leave the first name blank and I put in Scott, it'll be Chuck Scott. All right. This is just a little bit of a shortcut. So by putting this in here, like I said, this says, okay, if this is true, okay, then assign it. And if it's not true, assign that. It's what's considered to be a shortcut. I didn't make these rules up. Somebody else did. Somebody a lot smarter than I am. All right. So I'm going to change that back to the first name and the last name. Okay. And then do it like that. All right. Then we came down to here. So this is the rest of it. And this is set the URL. Okay. And what's that? Well, what this says is, give me a random joke. You already have seen that, but you can put parameters in there. This is saying basically replace, instead of having Chuck Norris all the time, if we have filled something into the first name and the last name, then use that. So it's going to come up here and it's going to grab the code from here. And if there's been nothing that's been put in the first name or last name, it'll put in Chuck Norris. If I put in the first name of Jane, and the last name of Doe, it'll be Jane Doe. All right. And then finally, all right, this is a little bit different. You may or may not have noticed in here, we got this word. All right. Back in the day when they started to write code that would have callback functions, which is what we're going to be working with a lot in this class, you did straight callbacks. All right. And you might say, well, who cares? When you did straight callbacks, you ended up having a lot of code, and then you'd have something in there and something in there and something in there, and you had it where literally you ended up with a lot of these things, sometimes 10, 20, 30 of them. And you got what was called callback hell is what you went into. People said that was too hard. It was too easy to screw things up, to not do something right, etc. Okay, so they went from straight callbacks, then they went into promises. You've seen a little bit with promises already with the then, all right, and the catch. But then they said, can we make that even easier? So they went into async await. So what we're saying in here is by making that async, we're saying that some of the stuff that's in here may take a little bit of time to complete. All right, so don't wait for it. All right, or do wait for it. In other words, if we didn't put that in, it would do this, it would do this. If I didn't have the word await there and I didn't have the word async right there, if this took any time at all, it would just keep going. It would jump right back down and it would do that, even if this wasn't done yet. So this, by using async and await, it's telling it, hey, wait till you get done and use this because you might need that in here. Wait till you get done with that because you may need that in here. And if at any time something doesn't work, log the error. So for instance, if I put a wrong URL in here, okay, it's going to log the error. Now, I'm not going to say to you, I'm not that stupid. I'm not going to say, hey, does that totally make sense to everybody? Because it may make very little sense. The reason I picked this example is it's more reminiscent of what we're moving towards. All right? We're not there yet, but we're getting there. So let me talk about tomorrow. All right? And a couple things. First thing, if I have the chance, I'm writing the answer key for that thing I gave you with those array exercises. All right, I'd like to go over those. Again, you didn't have to turn them in, but at least we'll be able to go over those. All right, that's the first thing. Second, I want, there's a couple more things, a couple more problems I'd like you to try. All right, and I'm still writing them. I don't like to give you work to do when I haven't done it yet myself. So I'm going to be working on a couple things tonight. If I get those done, or when I get those done, I am going to send you a worksheet that's going to have 2 problems on it. I will go over those 2 problems tomorrow, and I will show you what it should look like. All right? So there'll be some instructions on there. So tomorrow, we will go over the answers and we'll talk about some more of this stuff. I don't know if I'll have time to do another API example or not. All right. But if I do, then maybe we'll do that too. Then the rest of the period will end up being a lab. Friday will be lab for the entire period. Now, what I've decided to do, because I know that with a lot of you, you're very particular and you want things to look good and you want things to look professional, and that's a good thing. So rather than making that website, that gym website due this Sunday, I'm going to make it due next Sunday. All right. So again, tomorrow we will start by going over the answers to that array exercise. Then I'm going to give you one more worksheet that I'll either send out tomorrow morning or it'll be sent out before class. And I will go over that with you. All right. And then after that, all right, then after that, the rest of the period will be lab for you to work on that. Friday will be a lab period. But on Friday, I'm going to show you how I did the BMI problem, and I'm going to show you how I did the form thing on there. So really the only thing you've got to worry about, like John, I think it was, asked yesterday, can we do a regular calculator instead of a BMI? Sure. All right. But I'm going to show you the kind of thing I'm looking for. All right. Then again, the plan is next week, we're going to talk MySQL probably for the entire week. All right. I don't know. I don't have anything scheduled out for it yet. I'll be working on that this weekend. If we get all that stuff done by next week, then the following week we'll go in and we'll start doing some work with MongoDB. All right. But I'd like to try to start sliding in some Node.js in there as well. I may even give you a very simple example even tomorrow of Node so you can see the kind of thing that we're going to do. All right. I know Evan's going to hold off because he's still learning Node on his own. All right. But I'd like you to see it in action, so to speak. And there's a few things about Node I'd like to go over with you so you can start getting yourself acclimated to those. All right. So again, that's all I had for today. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. If something comes up later, I will be online tonight, probably from 7 until 9. Feel free to send me an email. I've already told you what we're doing for the rest of the week. All right. So with that, I'll just say goodbye, and I will see you tomorrow.